Hello and welcome to Atis Conflict Studio, where we try to manage conflicts because we know not all conflicts are to be resolved. Some can only be managed without a final resolution or reconciliation. Let's start today's episode with a question. Have you ever been part of a team where not everyone was a native speaker of the working language of the group? Or been in a relationship or friendship where not everyone speaks the same language as their first language? In such scenarios, have you ever noticed any problem or any issues with the language? Maybe a colleague struggled to find the right word. Or maybe you're not so sure if they fully understood you. Or sometimes maybe, just maybe, someone said something that sounded a little bit off or even offensive. And someone took an insult because of that. These scenarios can cause real conflicts in workplace or in relationships or even friendships. Imagine this situation. Lucia is a highly skilled engineer from Argentina. She joins an American firm. In one of the company meetings, she hesitates a lot before she speaks up. She's just thinking to make sure that she's using the right grammar and she's using the right words. This causes for others to speak over her or interrupt her. She's wondering, is that the case that they are just not respecting me? Or is that the case that they are just impatient with what I'm trying to say? Or they don't simply care? Mark, the American colleague of Lucia, simply thinks that Lucia has a passive personality. She may just not want to speak up in a meeting, or she may just not have the ideas or the right things to say at the moment. He actually doesn't even see the language as a problem. This is a classic scenario where language barrier is not just about words. It becomes about culture. It's about confidence, power dynamics, and cultural expectations in different groups. Speaking a second or a third language at work isn't just about vocabulary or grammar. It's about how people perceive you, and it's about the opportunities that may be presented to you. But before we begin diving deeper into this topic, let me clarify something. For today's purposes, I'll just use English as the native language for examples. However, when I'm referring to any situation where someone is working, socializing, or is in a relationship with an English speaker, I'm just using that language as for ease of reference. However, this can, of course, apply to anyone with any languages. Let's say Italian working in Germany, or a French person working in Brazil, or a Korean speaker working in a Spanish-speaking language. You get the idea. The principles remain the same. I'm just trying to simplify the concept. With that in mind, let's explore how language barriers impact workplace interactions and how the cultural differences affect the communication style when people speak the first language that is different than the working language or the primary language of a household or social interaction or a social group. And we will also share some practical ways to bridge the gap for a more inclusive work environment. And we'll see how we can benefit from the expertise of our bilingual or multilingual colleagues and friends. First, let's see how these language barriers show up in actual life. We already gave you an example. Now, there are different ways that we may see this problem in groups that speak different languages. One is when we are dealing with a meeting, speaking up in a meeting for non-native speakers often is a challenge because sometimes they just need more time to translate the ideas and then share them with the group. And choosing the right word, making sure that the grammar is correct, may take a bit longer. But imagine if you're in a fast paced environment, that pause may be misunderstood for hesitation or lack of having an idea to contribute. Sometimes it also causes misinterpretation of tone. For example, something that may be a direct word or direct sentence in a language, it may look too blunt or sound a little bit rude in another language. Let's say in some languages, you may need to say, "This report needs changes." That may just seem direct for some people, but not rude, not too blunt. But for someone else, that may be a little bit inconsiderate or a little bit too blunt. Another problem is workplace humor and small talk. As we know, a big part of socializing is talking about personal life, joking, laughing, banter. And a lot of times, non native speakers are not able to engage in those conversations, or they may not be able to socialize to their fullest capacity. I don't know if you've ever had this situation where someone sounded funnier when they spoke in their native language, or they even sounded more competent when they spoke in their native language. There is also the reality of accent biases. Let's address the elephant in the room. Accents matter. Studies show that people often consciously or unconsciously judge intelligence and competence based on the way that someone speaks, if they have accent or they don't have accent. So language can be an actual source of biases. Implicit bias is collection of subconscious attitudes, is prejudices and stereotypes that people develop over time. These biases are sometimes harder to even fix because we are just unaware of those biases or those subconscious perceptions that influence the way we make a decision or we view someone. Accents are an integral part of our identity, but they also make that person prone to be judged or their competency to be misunderstood because of the way they speak or because of the accent they have. Accent biases may be defined as unwarranted and unjustifiable prejudices towards individuals who communicate with a language that's different from the dominant language. It is unwarranted, it is unjustifiable, but it is real. It happens, and we have to see how we can deal with that. When you hear someone speak in a particular language, we may consciously or unconsciously categorize them in a specific social class. This grouping may lead to certain decisions. For example, this person may simply is unsophisticated or unintelligent. However, it's just because of the way they talk or the accent they have. Research in the United States shows that these biases, these accent biases, can lead to unequal access to employment, housing, and education. So it is a real problem, and we need to address it. Now that we have discussed potential challenges, let's break them down into key categories so that next time we see them, it's easier to recognize them and address them. So, as discussed, language and culture go hand in hand. How we speak and interpret communication is deeply shaped by cultural norms. Here are a few key differences. In some languages and some cultures, we have direct versus indirect conversation and communication style. English-speaking countries, for example, tend to favor directness. Tell me what you think. That's something you may hear in a workplace in America or in the UK. In many Asian or Latin American cultures, indirect communication is a norm. That's an interesting point. When you hear that, it might actually mean, I don't agree, but I won't say it outright. Silence and pauses. In some cultures, silence is a sign of thoughtfulness. for example, Japan and Finland. In some other fast paced cultures, silence may be interpreted as hesitation or lack of confidence. Can you imagine how things can go wrong if cultures clashes between people from these two different styles of cultures and how they interpret silence? The role of hierarchy. In some cultures, questioning a senior can be looked at as disrespectful. In some other cultures, for example, in most of American workplaces, speaking up and challenging ideas is often expected, if not rewarded. So when someone is quiet in a meeting, are they shy? Or do they disagree? Or are they just following their cultural norms? Next time, you may want to pay more attention to this issue. Now, how do we bridge the gap? When we have language barriers and different accents in a workplace or in a relationship or friendship. Whenever you are in a non-native English speaker or native speaker working with diverse colleagues, here are some ways for both sides to improve communication. If you are a non-native English speaker, here are some tips for you. Speak with confidence. Don't let your accent, grammatical errors, or word choices hold you back. It's okay to take your time. If you need more time, just say, "Let me gather my thoughts." Or, "I'll follow up with an email to share my ideas." Remember, even native speakers make mistakes, but they are not affected by it the same way that a non-native speaker is affected, because they are not too self-conscious about their mistakes. Secondly, don't be afraid to clarify. If someone is not clear, just ask. Just to confirm you were saying, or let me make sure I understood correctly. Actually, when we are dealing in mediation processes with different parties, active listening, or when we are just working with any legal setting, really, in most of even the positions, we encourage those type of questions because repeating and confirming is just to make sure that the information exchange is accurate. This applies even when everyone is native speaker of that language. So don't be afraid to confirm and double check. Thirdly, use tools, but don't rely too much on them because again, it may affect your confidence. We now have AI, translation apps, and voice recordings that can help you refine your messages before important conversations. But don't let them hold you back. Your ideas matter, even if they're not phrased perfectly. If you are a native speaker, here are some tips for you. Slow down and simplify without dumbing it down. You don't need to oversimplify, but be mindful of rapid-fire speech and use of unnecessary jargons. As we all know, even among native speakers, accent and expressions differ. If you have ever heard of a New Yorker speaking to a Los Angelino, you know what I mean. So why not extend the same grace to people from other parts of the world? Secondly, make space for different communication styles. If someone takes a second longer to respond, resist jumping in. And if you accidentally interrupt, make sure that they understand that it's okay for them to jump in later. You can say, "I was just trying to move the conversation forward, but I want to realize that this may need more time to be processed. So feel free to pause or follow up later." You don't even need to necessarily mention the language because the reality is that everyone can think or talk in different pace regardless of the language, but it shows up more when you're also dealing with people from different parts of the world or non-native speakers. Lastly, check your understanding without being condescending. Instead of saying, "Did you get that?" you can simply say, "Does that make sense? Does this explanation work for you?" At the end of the day, effective communication isn't about perfect language skills. It's about mutual understanding. If you have a teenager at home, you know firsthand that even if everyone is a native speaker, it doesn't always mean that they speak the same language. The world is evolving. So should we. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Ati's Conflict Studio. We have been incorporating great real-life examples from our listeners, and we'd love to hear more. So keep them coming. And remember, not all conflicts can be resolved, but every conflict can be managed. See you next time.